Hi, this is Kirby Summers, and I welcome you to the Epstein Project podcast. Today, I have a surprise for you. I have a co-host, and he's wonderful, and you're going to love him. His name is Jeremy Rothe-Kushel. Jeremy, can you hear me?
I hear you, Kirby. It's a pleasure to join you.
Thank you for being here. Would you be kind enough to introduce yourself to my followers?
Yes, for sure. My name's Jeremy Rothe-Kushel, born and raised in Los Angeles, California, and I am a broadcaster and a public interest analyst and documentarian and a producer of music with a background in education and permaculture applications and design. And politically consider myself a Jewish American patriot of conscience in terms of the matters that I take on in public. And I very much appreciate you and your work, Kirby.
And I yours. I've listened to some of your podcasts, and I thought, I've never had a co-host, but if there's going to be one, I'm going to see if Jeremy's up for it. So
Well,
I'm really excited about today's show.
me too. And thank you so much for inviting me.
So listen, I heard you talk about someone, and I'd love to start it with this person, if it's okay with you, Deborah Lipstadt. What can you tell us about Deborah and her connections to Leslie Wexner, for example?
Deborah Lipstadt is a professor at Emory University and started, I believe, their Jewish studies program down there in terms of history. The entire time, it looks like to me that she's been a professor, a full professor there. She's had a relationship being backed by Wexner and his foundation, and both by the foundation and by Wexner himself. For example, when they opened up a new, I think, an anti-Semitism center, I
Yes.
mean, a Holocaust memorial center in Ohio, under the auspices of Leslie Wexner. Deborah Lipstadt was one of the speakers to introduce Wexner, and that was in 2014. And so she has this long-term relationship. She was actually then also directly funded by Wexner when she had a legal battle with David Irving, which is some of it is portrayed in a fashion in the film, I believe called, I think it's called Defamation. Is that what it's called? No, it's Denial or something like that.
Denial,
Denial.
something like that, yeah. But I also understand that Joe Biden just gave her an interesting position in his White House.
Yeah, so she's been nominated to be the American ambassador, basically the international czar of anti-anti-Semitism, or identifying and combating anti-Semitism via the State Department. So it is really an ambassador level position, and she's been nominated. She's not yet been confirmed, but this is very interesting because the she takes on the she's the newest generation of what someone like Natan Sharonsky started, which was this idea of the quote unquote new anti-Semitism that the State Department from way back was aware of and was willing to combat anti-Semitism as was traditionally known. But then Natan Sharansky comes in, and then Deborah Lipstadt follows in his footsteps by adding on top of the awareness of anti-Semitism and fighting it, and overlays this whole Israeli political angle on top of it, and basically conflates them. And now Sharansky is interesting because there is also a tie-in there, just as Lipstadt has this long, multi-decades long relationship with a key Epstein patron, the key Epstein patron, really, Leslie
Hmm.
Wexner,
Hmm.
that she has this multi-decade relationship with Wexner. Sharansky comes in as a Soviet immigrant. He's sort of seen as the most famous of the Soviet Jewish refuseniks or immigrants to Israel. and very political, a lot of big aura around there in terms of Sharonsky's role. But then Sharonsky has a background interfacing with some of the Russian crime syndicate that actually was directly working with the Maxwell sons, I believe, out of Nordex. And there's a very interesting chapter in Red Mafia, how the Russian mob has invaded America by the late great Jewish American journalist Robert Friedman, where in the end chapters, I think it's chapter 11 about titled Global Conquest, it talks about how Sharansky comes into Israel and begins to ascend to these commanding heights in the Israeli government very quickly, is warned by U.S. State Department officials about these connections with the organized Russian crime money. And Sharansky flaunts all of that, accepts all of this money, and then takes on these positions where he then begins to advocate for things like the new anti-Semitism. He's also a key, quote unquote, public intellectual in the public justifications for the American war on Iraq. And so that then begins to fit in because Wexner, the Lipstadt's patron, is the key person to have financed and contracted the American domestic propaganda push for the Iraq War too. And so Wexner hires Frank Luntz, the Republican spin guru, to do a long-term study on how to frame the war in Iraq as in American interests and not as Israeli interests. And it begins that paper. And Bob Petrakis, actually, the great journalist, does a very interesting write-up of this at the time, titled "The Wexner War," that deals with some of this, which is very, very interesting. And basically, in the very beginning of the Wexner analysis by Frank Luntz, it says Israel has done very good to remain silent both before the war and the immediate wake of the launching of the war. And so I just find it stunning and telling that both of the key pillars of quote unquote the new anti-Semitism in our contemporary political age, Natan Sharonsky and Deborah Lipstadt, both have direct connections to funding via the Epstein Maxwell network. And in Sharonsky's case is a crucial player in the framing, the other part of the PR framing for the Iraq War, just like Lipstadt's patron Leslie Wexner was.
You mentioned that Sharansky was in some way connected to Robert Maxwell's sons. Could you elaborate?
Yes, and the I don't know all of the details here, but
Mhm.
it's via the Russian oligarch who runs Nordex, I believe.
Mhm.
And I think it was both the Maxwell sons, Kevin, I don't remember
Kevin and Ian?
Kevin and Ian both worked for Nordex. And I'm looking for the name of the Russian oligarch here. Let me see here.
I think it's interesting that all of these connections. So, for example, people are a little surprised to hear that in the new administration, Joe Biden. So now we have Deborah Lipstadt, but we also have Antony Blinken, and then we have Leah Pissar, whose father, Samuel Pissar, was Robert Maxwell's confidant, best friend, attorney, commencing like in the 1950s. And so their connection to, let's say, the United States begins with John F. Kennedy's administration, where Samuel Pissar becomes his advisor. Now, Pissar is a French-born attorney with connections to Israel. In fact, when Robert Maxwell died, he was the last person that he spoke with prior to falling or jumping off or being pushed off his yacht, the Lady Ghislaine. And who does Betty Maxwell call in her moment of grief? She reaches out to the her lifelong friend, during the many years she was Robert Maxwell's wife. Uh, she reaches out to Samuel Pissar, and he steps in and he arranges the pompous funeral that's given to Robert Maxwell in Israel. So people seem not to understand that there are connections within the Epstein Maxwell, let's call it an iceberg that we have bumped into, with all of our, I'm going to call them heads of state, because
Mhm.
that's kind of almost how I look at them. Yeah, I don't know necessarily anymore. I don't know that we necessarily have, because I know I'm sorry, Bob Fitrakis, who I co-wrote a book with, and who he was so on it. He was on to Leslie Wexner and Jeffrey Epstein in the 1990s. Um, he um, he was one of the first people to sort of bump into that wall of don't get any closer. Uh, Bob basically told me when he was working on those pieces, and a lot of those are the groundwork for everything that you and I do today. He said he received not one, but two handwritten letters. These two letters were mailed to him, and they said the words Jeff Epstein equals toe tag. It was signed Skyhawk. So of course he took that as a death threat. So, but again, now I'm going to just hand it on to you, because don't you just think that the connections are just, they're not coincidental anymore, right?
No, and it's very specific actually, and you're right about Fitrakis, about he was on to a lot of this right in that moment and doing write-ups about the ties between Wexner and Epstein in the moment. He seemed to make already have made the obvious connection about the that this townhome, the most expensive townhome, right? I believe
Yes.
in Manhattan, was handed over from Wexner to Epstein, fully wired for audiovisual surveillance. And when you then tie that to Maxwell, both the Maxwells, but mainly Robert Maxwell and his role as a spy, and it's very easy to then push that analysis that this is a blackmail operation, not just some kind of crazed playboy billionaire. And so Fitrakis was on that, and then also connecting the dots in terms of the Wexner Iraq War connection way back then, and actually his articles at that time are crucial to my understanding in the more contemporary era now. And then so I found the reference to it's a Grigor Luchansky. Grigory
Mhm.
Luchansky is the Russian oligarch, the Nordex president, Russian oligarch who Sharonsky was directly connected with, accepting money from, and was warned against it. And of course, this comes right into the contemporary moment, and we won't get all up into it. But
Right.
Luchansky was also with Vadim Rabinovich, and so someone even like Rudy Giuliani, when he goes to Ukraine, he's with Vadim Rabinovich, and these are the networks too that they often use the covers or of sort of what are seen as Jewish community and Jewish religious organizations or Jewish federations. I would assert as fronts for what is actually deep politics and fronts for in global intelligence operations. And then one last thing I wanted to mention about Natan Sharonsky, and this is not really well known, is that he was accused by very credible other Jewish former Soviet, then Israeli refuseniks who had been subjected to prison camps under the Soviet regime, of actually being a Soviet police agent. And then Sharansky sued the. It's actually he was a very highly regarded Israeli surgeon, Yuli Noodleman, and who wrote the book. I think it's called Sharansky Unmasked. And the only reporting I can find on this, and the book itself is only in Hebrew and Russian, I believe.
Hmm.
But the only reporting I can find about it is in a book by the late Israeli muckraker Barry Chamish's book, where it's a chapter titled Natan Sharonsky, the Liar, an interview by Barry Chamish of Dr. Yuli Noodleman. And I think the implications there, if they are true, is that Sharansky is not even who he says he is in terms of being a Soviet Jewish refusnik who then ascends to the commanding heights of the Israeli state, but that he's seen by his fellow Jewish Israelis who are also Soviet refuseniks as being a potential long-term Soviet police or slash intelligence agent. And his interface with the Maxwell network via Nordex and Grigory Luchansky would suggest something very similar to that. Maxwell himself was at
Right.
the as at the it was at the intersection of an Israeli super spy, but also interfacing with the highest levels of KGB.
Yeah, everything smells of intelligence. If you remember in the early days when we were all listening to Jeffrey Epstein got arrested, and we started to just devour everything that had been written about Epstein, he freely told people that he worked for the CIA, that he was a Mossad agent, and people didn't know if he was joking, right, or telling the truth. Um, in the 1980s, I think I don't, it was even, I'm trying to remember the days, but remember there used to be in New York a very famous studio. It was Studio 54. Donald Trump was one of the first people. In fact, he went on the first day with then his wife, Ivana. It was a studio owned by Ian Schrager, um, whose father was connected to the mob, whose attorney was Roy Cohn. So when they got caught, who was their attorney? Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn obviously became connected, was Donald Trump's attorney. Um, I think I brought them up because, and you're going to have to just take me back to the point where I was just trying to find the connection here. They these people have fronts, so that when Robert Maxwell, let's say in 1987, docks the Lady Ghislaine behind the United Nations in New York City and invites Donald Trump, there's this photograph that has made the rounds, and it was found in a sort of like a small little shop in Florida by a collector. It's these photographs, there were several hundred of them. It's believed that Ivana Trump threw them away. Someone found them. They were sort of hidden away in this little trunk. Somebody walked into the store, bought the little trunk, went home, and voila, there are these photographs of Donald Trump with Robert Maxwell, John Tower. Now we know the significance of John Tower, right? There is the channel, I believe it's channel, oh, what is his name? He also went to the same um summer camp that Jeffrey Epstein went to and then attended. In any event, he's one of
Hmm.
these well-known news anchors. His name escapes me, but it might come
Oh,
back.
Wallace,
Yes, Wallace. So
Mike
Wallace,
Wallace, yeah.
so there's Mike Wallace, there's John Tower, there's Donald Trump, and the people that came with Donald Trump were Roy Cohn, but the more important one is Roy Cohn's partner, who no one ever really knows much about. I have his name in I believe Jeffrey Epstein, Predator Spy, and I go into him a little bit. What's interesting is that he ran a PR agency as well on the side, and they did some work for Robert Maxwell and for Donald Trump's father, so that these connections go back in time. It's just people that are looking at this information new don't know the backstory, and that really it does go back generations. So it's fascinating to hear you uh, bring up the Maxwell brothers, because when during the time that they sort of were supposed to be broke, if you remember, Robert Maxwell had been photographed with his it's a photograph, I believe, taken in 1971, because I think 1971, 1972, Ghislaine was approximately 9 years old, maybe 10, and she hated this woman. This woman was Robert Maxwell's longtime personal assistant in those days. It was a secretary, Jean. Oh, I need to find her name, Jean something or other. But my point is that when the Maxwell sons were supposed to be broke, suddenly I found an article from, I think it's one of the UK newspapers, a very old article, connecting them to a company owned by Jean. So again, who was she, right? Was she like a covert person? I mean, she was at Maxwell's side for 30 years, and then he's dead, and she creates a corporation, and then that's how they get their money, right? So that there are all
Hmm.
these things that happen that people just don't see. But Bob Fitrakis, God bless him. I mean, he
Hmm.
really he just went in there and he started the dialogue, really.
Yes, and he grappled with the intersection of some of these areas that are dismissed or covered up by the accusation of conspiracy theory or conspiratorial thinking. In terms of he was very early on to dealing with things like the um, election rigging, and how there was a strong Ohio connection to all of that in 2004, actually. But also
Yeah,
then this background of Epstein, Wexner, and intelligence. And so I would mention some of his articles. One is the aforementioned Wexner War. Another is Spook Air. Another would be the Shapiro murder file, and then another would be Epstein's Columbus connection. And I believe all those are findable. And Kirby, I've been working to catch up on your massive production of information in terms of the combination of your books and your tweets and your podcasts. And I ran into very interesting a piece that you put forth in a podcast where you were talking about the some of the legal connections to the black cube, basically a cutout, a corporate
yes,
cutout of Israeli intelligence that was utilized, for example, to follow, basically harass, keep track of both the accusers and victims of Harvey Weinstein, and also the reporter, in terms of Ronan Farrow, and that there was these two very interesting connections to the Black Cube legal advisors. Would you
right,
explain
right.
some of that?
Yeah, but I want to take it from the beginning. So, the way the Black Cube was introduced to Harvey Weinstein is really of interest. David Boies um, was called, and he basically he was called by a Barak, and they put,
And Kirby, I just want to briefly fill in
Yes.
the background of Barack here.
Okay.
Okay, because Barack, and often when we're dealing in these areas, we talk a lot about like Mossad, which is the Israeli version of the CIA, which is human intelligence. Uh, but Barack actually has probably one of the most extensive backgrounds of any world leader that we can think about in terms of all these areas of military. Both operations and intelligence. He was, of course, the became a prime minister of Israel, but he was also basically the head of their Pentagon. He was the chief of the IDF, the Israeli army, but he was also the head of Israeli military intelligence, which is known as Amman. And he was also in the same special forces group, actually was, I believe, a commander, the supervisor of Benjamin Netanyahu, of an IDF. It's basically Special Forces Reconnaissance group. And over and over, I begin to see those who were part of that group who ascend to these international positions, such as Ehud Barak and Netanyahu, as actually doing something like seeing their operations in the United States. And Netanyahu spent a lot of time in the United States as operating behind what they see as enemy lines in terms of, at least in terms of military operations. So I just wanted to bring that in, that the background of Ehud Barak is basically, we've not had a single leader in the United States that held all of those positions. The closest would be is like someone like maybe Dwight Eisenhower, who was a high
True.
level general and then a president. But we've never had someone who's been the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, also a president, also the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and also the Secretary of Defense. That's basically who Ehud Barak is. And so we have to consider that when we think about him as interfacing with this Epstein network.
Yes, and let's not lose sight of the fact that Jeffrey Epstein invested money into a company, Carbine, which is basically our new 911, so that when anything happens within the United States, I believe at this point, Carbine, which has dropped their 911 and has already had a name change to kind of remove itself from Jeffrey Epstein. Uh, that's who you call. So they are our police. That is the call center. And if you know anything about what happened to Maria Farmer in Ohio when she called the sheriff's office, and they basically turned around and said to her, "Hey, we work for Wexner. We're not going to come and help you." And when I was being attacked and the intruder was trying to come into my apartment, I called 911, and this was in 1991, Jeremy. In 1991, I had the
Wow.
intruder trying to get into my home, and I called 911 not once, but twice. And the first time they said, I told him the buzzer is not working, so you'll have to buzz someone else. In New York City, if a buzzer is not working, people buzz any apartment. And so they said to me, "Sorry, you'll have to come down and let us in, or we can't come." And and at this point, I'm screaming. It's it's after 11 o'clock at night. It's almost midnight, and then she's gone, and I call again after a couple of more minutes, and then I say, "Please listen, I need help. Can you hear the noise? He's trying to get in. He's going to get in." And I went back on the line and she hung up on me. So that
Wow.
we literally now, if you call 911, or if I were to call 911 because I have a problem, I would be calling Ehud Barak, who is a friend of the people that did not go to Maria Farmer's rescue, did not come to my rescue. But in any event, Black Cube.
This is such an important point. I just want to highlight this is what an
Yeah,
important point this is that what you experience and what other victims of these networks have experienced is the bought off, the paid for police who were supposed to take an oath to protect and to serve, and then are bought off basically in a both an individual and in a structural basis. But what you're talking about is that if basically Carbine 911, this Epstein invested company with Ehud Barak on the board is fully rolled out in the United States, which is the intent to replace our
Yes,
911 system totally with this Israeli military intelligence software, then they don't even need then whoever is attempting to intercept this or to not help a victim of some kind of powerful network, they won't even have to necessarily buy off the local police. It'll just be intercepted. It'll be basically 911 will be just an outgrowth of a foreign intelligence service.
100%. And I'll tell you the more frightening scenario, which I've already experienced. They will send someone to your home. They will know who you are. You're a victim of one of these powerful men who, some of which have been exposed at this point. You're a victim of one of these people. And instead of coming to your rescue, they come to help suicide you, right? So
Hmm.
in my case, I had someone who claimed to be from the FBI come to my door. This was just 2 years ago. Come to my door. In from my experience, it's like, okay, if the FBI wants to talk to me, they would have called me, they would have sent me a letter, there would have been something. I'm always terrified if somebody just knocks on my door because of my long battle with these monsters. And so I called 911, and this time, 2 police officers showed up. And listen, whenever I have called 911, and I have from time to time during the last couple of years, they send the shortest. I'm a small woman, but they'll send people smaller than me. They must ask for the short sections of the
Send out the shortest guy. Oh, it's
and,
Kirby
and,
calling.
and
Send
it's
out the
not.
shortest guy.
And it's not even guys. I've never had a male. Well, maybe at one or two I'll have a male, but he's short. Usually they will send me 2 small females smaller than me, and I'm tiny. And it's like, so like I open the door, there are 2 females there. They're smaller than me. This guy is standing there, literally, he looked like he just stepped out of the Dick Tracy cartoon. He was wearing a trench coat, and I'm looking at him and I'm looking at the police and I'm thinking, okay, what's wrong with this picture? And I asked the police, hey, he says he's FBI. And they say to me, yes, we checked his credentials and he
Uh,
is. And I looked at them and I said, okay, so why don't you stand here and I will listen to whatever he has to say to me. To which they replied, oh no, we have to leave. Whatever he has to say to you, you guys have to talk about it in private. So they immediately disappeared into the elevator and he continued to stand in front of my door. So I locked the door. I walked into my living room, I picked up the phone, I contacted the FBI's New York City office.
wow.
I insisted that they let me speak with someone because I had an FBI agent at my door. And so a woman, thank goodness, got on the phone with me and I explained to her what I just explained to you. And I said, do you have an appointment for me to speak with someone? Because I said, I'm a woman alone. I just played that card. I didn't want to, bring up my whole history. I'm a woman alone and I'm taking care of my sick nephew and I don't want to let a man into my apartment. To which she was very helpful. She took some time to look through her records. She said, I don't have anyone here scheduled to see you. So I said, I'm not going to let him in. She said, good. Yeah, don't. And so
Wow.
they will send Carbine 911, I'm sure. That will be one of their jobs. So in any event, to get back to Black Cube, Black Cube started to do some work for Harvey Weinstein when Rose McGowan uh, and Ronan Farrow were trying to expose his decades long sex, like he would rape these aspiring actresses, in hotel rooms. And just so when Rose was writing a book and Ronan was trying to write the article, um Black Cube, which is staffed by former Mossad agents, like literally, they're all from the agency. If you finish working at the Mossad or you don't want to work there anymore, you can come to Black Cube and we're going to hire you. And so
And
these
similarly
people,
to Barack, it was actually founded by military intelligence, and then they staff it with Mossad.
there you go. And so what happens? I mean, so they one person becomes very friendly with Rose, lies to her, of course, uses an alias, meets with her, befriends her, becomes her quote new best friend, um, just to sort of get information and to make sure to tell Harvey Weinstein that, somehow the book is not going to be published or this is not going to happen. Ronan Farrow is terrified. He has to move to another apartment in New York City because he thinks someone is going to kill him. That is how bad it got. Well, so who are the attorneys for Black Cube? Bill Gates' father, who is now deceased. So Bill Gates Sr. has a company, which is now owned, by the way, by Bill Gates, regular Bill Gates that we know. But Bill Gates Sr. owned a legal law firm. I'm sorry, owned a law firm that also has many side businesses. And I have a podcast about that, and maybe you and I can discuss that some other time.
Mm.
His partner for as the attorney for Black Cube was Michael Jury, who is the director of legal affairs at GCHG, which is basically, why don't you fill everybody in on what they are in the United Kingdom?
Okay, so the GCHQ is the NSA of the United Kingdom. So it's their signals intelligence headquarters. And what I found very interesting about this is that this Michael Drury is their first chief counsel, uh, and this is and it and basically he was there for all throughout the 90s. It looks like to me, or at the late
Yes,
90s into the early 2000s, and then he acts as this legal advisor to Black Cube, while he's also acting as a legal advisor, it looks like, to the contemporary moment, to all kinds of potential oligarchs, including former Soviet sphere oligarchs who are beginning to run into certain kinds of money troubles in relationship to UK regulations, is it what it looks like? And so if that's sort
yep,
of where he's ended up now, you can imagine what exactly he was doing in terms of advising Black Cube, which is basically how can you get by the kinds of maybe privacy regulations there might be, and then what in the heck was he actually doing in terms of advising the British signals intelligence? And what I found super interesting is that it begins to then connect back into this network that surrounded the Iraq War, because we talk about this analysis of the Epstein Maxwell network as an espionage network and a compromise network specifically. And so the question of compromise then brings up, well, what were they actually doing? What were some of the results of this network? And so pointing to Wexner, as we have before, in terms of his direct relationship with the propaganda framing of the Iraq War, you can begin to see, oh, maybe this network was instrumental or at least deeply involved in the Iraq War operation. And so what popped in my mind was a very interesting article by an author from the UK named Johnny Vedmore, that refers to an interesting log that he found in the Epstein logs, where Epstein usually would travel with his whole coterie, and this trip was just Epstein and one other associate, who is a woman, and we're not going to name her, but can go find this article. But the subtitle of this article is Epstein and this woman, September 1st, 2002, the secret senators and the Wexner War on Iraq. And what this points to was that this trip taken by Epstein and this woman, who's also interfaces with the Carbine 911 and Ehud Barak, as was mentioned before, that this trip was taken to they flew in via France, I believe Paris, and then fly to Birmingham Airport in the UK, and then are helicoptered down to the Foxcote Manor in these very beautiful sort of fancy hills into the north east of the GCHQ headquarters, where a lot of the uh, British elite have manors. And this Foxcote Manor was owned by the Wexners. I believe it continues to be owned by the Wexners. Is that's
Yes,
right?
it's not only right. One of my followers about 2 or 3 weeks ago tweets out or sends me a private message letting me know that, oh, Leslie Wexner is here. His plane landed and he and bodyguards have gotten onto a helicopter, so basically the same thing, and flown on to Foxcote, where he is going to have, quote, a hunting weekend. Well, you and I know that more happens during their holidays, right? They're going to be meeting with someone, they're going to be planning something. And I just want to circle back for a moment, if it's okay with you, to talk about what one of the findings that Bob Fitrakis wrote about in Spook Air, in that particular article. He discusses their role in a CIA operation. Do you remember that one? Because I'm going to bring it up
No.
if it's okay with
Yeah,
you.
go for it.
Oh, okay, cool. So Bob Fitrakis in Spook Air does connect Leslie Wexner and Jeffrey Epstein to the CIA. And he does that because the CIA's airline, and by the way, do you know who the attorney for Southern Air Transport was at one point in time for a long time during the Iran-Contra problem? Do you want to take a guess? Okay, if I gave you initials, maybe you can guess?
Okay, yeah.
Okay, BB, but technically WB.
Oh, William Barr.
Yes, yes, yes.
Wow.
Yeah, so he was the attorney for Southern Air Transport, the CIA's airline. All right,
Right.
so what happens in Ohio during the time that Jeffrey Epstein and Leslie Wexner are are very close? And remember, in Ohio, Wexner gave the same house that Maria Farmer was sexually assaulted at, that was on Wexner's property. It's the second largest home in all of Ohio. He gave that to Jeffrey Epstein. So Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell would spend a lot of time there. So in the New York Times reported um, that Wexner's the Limited needed help getting their goods from the Orient into the United States, and that Southern Air was going to accomplish this on their behalf. So the article was dated from 1995. It was removed. Bob Fitrakis really is the one who said yes, they moved to Rickenbacker Port Authority. They got a lot of tax breaks, and after like 2 or 3 years of kind of like, and it really was like a CIA operation of drugs and guns, right? And don't forget that Fitrakis also stumbled upon that report, right? That kind of linked Wexner to organized crime.
Are you
So
talking about the Ohio Inspector General David
yes,
Sturt's report? Yes.
yes. And so what I did when I was writing Predator Spy, because a lot of that stuff was gone, and I just wanted to find a confirmation that indeed the CIA had been in Ohio for a while, because I know that remember they had Mina, they had a strip in Miami. They've had different places um for their use. And so I just wanted to make sure, and I was able to find a government prepared document for the United States Army Corps of Engineers in dated January 2017. It's a 26-page report, and it's was done in coordination with the Ohio Environment Agency. And so what they do is they investigate environmental sites for concern for toxic waste. So in this report, I found that they indeed had Southern Air as having been one of the people who left toxic
Who trashed the
residue.
land.
Yeah, yeah. So not only did they not pay the taxes, and they got I believe it was a $300,000 deferral, but they came in using Leslie Wexner's Victoria's Secret, the limited. Now, come on. So at that point, we can connect it to the CIA. We can connect Southern Air Transport, whose only reason for being um, has always been drugs for guns, right? We can connect that to, also to Alan Fires, who is a former CIA officer, and Richard Secord, um, that got caught up in Iran-Contra. And this is stuff that, while Bob Fitrakis was writing about it, few people really absorbed it at the time, right? Because people are listening and reading mainstream media news, which focuses on the trafficking and the sex side of the Epstein umbrella, right? They're not looking even at Alex Acosta's statement. I was told to back off that Epstein, belonged to intelligence. But there are all of these signs that you and I have just discussed, including what Bob Fitrakis began working on, that clearly demonstrates that, yeah, it was an intelligence operation. And when Robert Maxwell died, he is known as what? Why don't you take the floor now? What is he known on? Robert Maxwell. How do we remember him?
Israel's super spy.
There you go. I mean, so what are we looking at?
Exactly. I appreciate you bringing back in Wexner and Ohio and Southern Air Transport, because it's also a missing piece of the more general alternative understanding, even of like the drug running during the Iran Contra times. And you pointed out that most everybody who's paying some attention knows the background of Clinton's Arkansas and the CIA with the drug strip in Mina and the suspicious deaths surrounding all of that. But there was also this maybe even an even more central geographical role of Ohio and Columbus, Ohio specifically. And it looks like Epstein was crucial to helping Wexner move Southern Air Transport from Miami to Ohio in terms of its epicenter. And so geography and understanding and analyzing this network is crucial. And back to even thinking like things like New Mexico and the Zorro Ranch and how close it is geographically to the headquarters, the epicenter of the American nuclear establishment, and that whole then background of Maxwell and John Tower and the backdoored Israeli intelligence promise software that was then delivered into the heart of American nuclear secrets. And so if you pay attention to geography in a lot of this, you can actually begin to uh, filter out a lot of the key things that are maybe not being focused on. And so actually one other thought I had, and I combined the different facts on this in order to check it out. And I know there's an issue with Ari Ben Menashe, obviously, in terms of his
Yes.
background with Israeli intelligence. But what's interesting is in his book Prophets of War, he talks about the Bank One of Ohio was one of the key American banks used to bank and wash covert Iran Contra money. And it turns out Leslie Wexner, was a director of Bank One of Ohio. And so that's the main fact that I think is really, really important to understand in terms of Wexner being apparently at the very epicenter of the trucking and bartering of illicit material that then also includes questions of money laundering and all of that, which is, of course, the actual nature of the organized crime, the quote unquote deep state. What you're really talking about is trucking and bartering in weapons, drugs, and humans. And that sort of triangle of illicit, illegal substances, I think, is crucial to understand. And then, as you pointed out, the limited Leslie Wexner's limited question of moving cargo. They were tied to what is they were actually 90% of limited ground cargo was moved by Walsh Trucking Company,
Right.
mob tied company, and Fitrakis, and I believe the David Sturtz, the Ohio
Yes.
uh, investigator, both looked into this.
So one thing that's overlooked when the CIA is what we got to learn about during the half-baked Iran-Contra hearings, where basically Bill Barr, could not have George Bush thrown under the bus. And so he devised a way to pin this on Oliver North. In any event, uh, what they do and what they have done, and we can think about discussing this at some other point, is the destabilization of countries. And the CIA, with the help of Mossad, frankly, has been destabilizing countries for a very long time. Um, if we go back and we look at what was happening before the Iran-Contra story broke in 1986 as a result of one of the Southern Air transport planes being shot out of the sky over Nicaragua, which kind of like was the door that opened it to the world. Before that happened, um, they were training troops. They were these mercenaries. So they would train anyone who came in. You could have been an American or you could have been a local. And they had this training camp in Florida. It's a lot. Florida is one of those states like Ohio. It's kind of like close to, you have access to leave it very easily, right? Without anybody seeing you. And Ohio is also kind of a hub that has a lot of avenues in and out. But they would train them to murder and to destabilize. And so I have a little section here that I kind of made notes on. And if you don't mind, I just want to find it and read this to you. So these soldiers were trained to kill, to rape, to destroy, and torture. And they routinely broke into the private homes of the people who lived in the country in Nicaragua. Um, and they would rape the wife and the children in front of the father to terrorize them, and then they would kill them. And they did this throughout the country in order to keep the people as sort of, so that don't complain, don't come out of your house. I mean, you can't go to the store anyway because we have stopped the transportation of food, for example. So while we all know about the drugs and the guns, um, they go into a country, they destabilize it. So we have to also, and then, you brought up the Iraq war and how Leslie Wexner was responsible for even the answers. He gave detailed answers in that report. Um, this is a small part, frankly, a small part of a very large operation that has been ongoing for many years. It's all intelligence. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, and when you talk about the training of operatives in something that's so obviously trauma based mind
Yeah,
control at some level, at the same time as just pure physical violence and domination in a country, in terms of using rape in relationship also to the destabilizing of the families and the fathers and all of that too. The combination there, it reminds me of that crucial point that you made in our interview about how you had learned from Bill Hamilton that a copy of Promise was given to Epstein specifically to track the networks of their victims. And
yeah,
that reminds me that in Promise was apparently delivered to such governments by the Israelis, I believe. So the Israeli backdoored version of Promise was delivered to such governments as the military dictatorship in Guatemala. So that
yes,
then makes me, then I am now understanding more of what you're talking about in terms of then both targeting quote the dissidents, or that they need to then torture or rape or trauma-based mind control in some way, but then also then track them after the fact, keep track of that network. And so I'm really beginning to understand that. So thank you.
yeah. There every now and then, I just go really deep into these little rabbit holes, and of particular interest to me are whistleblowers of any sort, because every whistleblower, as you know, like Michael Reconciuto, if that's the right pronunciation, who helped expose the Promise issue, he was immediately put into jail for a very long time. He was only recently released, but whenever there's and he actually is the one uh, who created the backdoor into Promise, and he on behalf of the Hamiltons signed a document, and then he was put into jail with these charges of drug. They always find a way to put a whistleblower in jail. So I like whistleblower testimony because they're going to tell you the truth. I found a report of a whistleblower who was a CIA operative, and he said that d- he would also make these trips, these covert trips on Southern Air Transport, and he in fact implicated Eastern Airlines as having been connected to the CIA, which I found endlessly fascinating. But one thing that has struck me is the disregard for children and women, because one of the operations that he was sent on was to deliver several dozen American blonde women who believed they were going to be in a movie, and they had been told they were going to be in a movie by, I guess, whoever had them meet this CIA pilot at the airport, and they were told they were going to fly. I believe it was. I think it could have been Hawaii. It could have been somewhere else. And when he began to take off, he got last minute instructions to deliver these women instead to the people who were sort of running something in China. And he takes these several dozen women, he detours, he's not going to say no. He detours, he takes them to China, and he is told to present them to this group of Chinese officials as a gift from the United States. He writes he never heard or saw from them again. However, he got paid close to $500,000 for that operation. So that the disregard for women and children that I have seen while studying these covert operations extends into what we see with Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah, and the way that you talk about how the format of the abuse of the whistleblower victims, in terms of turning them into the victimizers is indicative of the way that that attitude is even used in public in order to discredit and abuse the value of their humanity, ultimately by the same networks that abuse them in physically in the first place, is what it seems like to me.
Yeah, I mean, and that mindset hasn't ended. As you know, Prince Andrew just pulled a wild card, an old article from 2015, discrediting Virginia. Um, and that they have used that card. Leon Black is using that card against Guzel Ganeva. Um, that card of discrediting the whistleblower rape victim or someone who's turned into a sex slave or used for one of these operations, um, has been used successfully until now. You know, we have turned the corner. So if anything good has come out of the Epstein um, trafficking ring and the Me Too movement that sort of came in with the Weinstein thing and the Black Cube situation and Ronan Farrow and everybody talking about it, while right now it's a limited amount of women who have stepped forward, this I hope will open the door and will usher in more protections for the lives of not just women but children who are easier to manipulate and easier to get rid of. So that is, you know, I work all the time. As you see, I don't take a lot of time off, but it's that goal. It's like that hope that was never there before. It wasn't there for me. One of my followers tweeted the other day, "Oh, but there could have somebody has to, you know, get help." So I did a whole podcast. I said, "Where do you get help? If the police are in on it, right?
Mhm.
If your elected officials are in it on a local level, and then the federal government, and an interesting thing that I'll add before we end our chat, which has been lovely, thank you so much, is that the problem of human trafficking is a big problem. The federal government does not have one single agency that will do, let's say, what Joe Biden just selected Deborah to do. It's all on the local level, so that it's the police job to monitor human trafficking. What do they do if there is a massage parlor that is quote busted? They arrest the very victims of human trafficking and they let their customers go. So we need to somehow make it a necessity, a requirement for there to be some kind of office that is not on the local level, but that is on the federal level to address this. Do you believe that there's no federal agency responsible for human trafficking? None.
Wow.
I
Well,
know it's shocking, but it's
yeah.
intentional. Don't you see how intentional that is? I mean, it's like keep it at the local level. This way, their whole thing is plausible deniability.
Yes, and I do want to acknowledge and thank you for your ongoing work, your tireless work in this area at this key time, because it does seem that the answer to, why don't they contact somebody is, like you said, who are they going to contact? So the actually who they're going to contact is the
Is
people.
911
Well, but
Carbine.
right, but
Look,
that's already been compromised, and so the only potential people that they can contact that haven't been compromised here are actually the people, we the people, and so
us,
your efforts, to gather the information so that the people can understand what is actually going on. I believe that's the people that they can contact for help. And that's the question, is when we will get it together in order to get all this information together and then figure out what we, the people, want, what kind of society we want to live in, what kind of governments we want to have, and how we want to conduct ourselves as people, but that's going to take responsibility to be the person, who's going to take responsibility for being contacted, even if it's just by the information that one is learning about. And so I think that's the crucial decision that you made in this time when this Epstein story began to blow open, to be like, this is the moment to push through. And what's interesting, one last thing in terms of that, is that there's the ancient Greek arts of rhetoric, included what the well-worn ones that are known as ethos, the appealing to people's sense of culture, ethics, morality; pathos, appealing to their sense of emotion, or of the emotional sense of wrongness, if you're pointing out something that's gone down; logos, or logos, which would be appealing to their rationality in their mind with facts. But there's a fourth one that's usually not talked about, which is kairos, and it's actually the most musical of the forms because it has to do with improvisation. But really, its definition is about the knowing when to push through, when to improvise and push through. And so that's what I see as what you've taken up in this moment, is an embrace of the moral power of kairos, to be like, this is our time to educate ourselves and each other about this, if we want to to have something different, a different way of conducting ourselves.
Well, thank you for that. I think that if one survives, you you always want to help someone else. I didn't realize that it would be this time intensive, this labor intensive. I didn't, who knew, right? But I knew that I had to bring my whatever I had gathered in while pursuing the answers to my own questions to this, because they were all connected. But it does, somebody like yourself, your work, and we there's so many people on the front lines now, right? So thank goodness there's us, and thank goodness that people are opening their eyes and they're looking at this and they're saying, okay, there's something wrong here. And that's the first step. And we're past the first step, and yay. And thank you for today, Jeremy. Maybe we can do this again. What do you say?
I'd love to, and there's so many, we could go on for hours, I'm sure, and
I know, I
there's
know.
still loose ends that I'm sure I've left here too. But so yeah, let's do it again, Kirby.
Thank you for joining me. Well, listen, everybody, please leave your questions in the comment section below. I'm sure Jeremy and I will do this again. And if we have missed anything, if there's anything that you heard during this podcast that you want a little more information on, you know, we're always working, Jeremy and I.
Mhm.
So leave your comments and questions below. And thank you for joining us. Again, it's Kirby Summers with Jeremy Roth-Kushel for the Epstein Project podcast. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.